The aging brain possesses a remarkable, often underestimated capacity for regeneration and functional maintenance when provided with the precise biological inputs it requires. Science now illuminates a future where cognitive decline is not an inevitable consequence of passing the 60-year mark, but rather a manageable outcome of specific nutritional deficits that can be corrected. The prevailing narrative suggests that memory lapses and slower processing speeds are irreversible signs of wear and tear. Yet this view ignores the fundamental plasticity of the nervous system. By shifting focus from passive acceptance to active biological support, the individual can unlock a robust trajectory of mental clarity and focus. This exploration identifies the specific lipid structures and metabolic pathways that underpin neural health, guided by the perspective of neurobiologist Andrew Huberman, to offer a concrete roadmap for preserving the mind's vitality. Establishing the lipid foundation for neural signaling. The human brain is primarily composed of fat, not as adipose tissue, but as structural lipids that form the integrity of every single neuron membrane. Andrew Huberman frequently emphasizes that the fluidity and stability of these cell membranes are the non-negotiable baselines for electrical signaling and neurotransmitter efficiency. Among the most critical components for maintaining the structural integrity are omega-3 fatty acids, specifically eicosapentaenoic acid, or EPA, which plays a distinct role in countering the inflammatory processes that naturally rise with age. When the concentration of EPA in the blood is sufficient, it acts as a gatekeeper, ensuring that the inflammatory cytokines that typically degrade neural tissue are kept in check. The body cannot synthesize these essential fats in adequate quantities on its own, meaning the individual relies entirely on external sources to replenish the raw materials needed for cellular repair. Without a consistent supply of high-quality EPA, the neuronal membranes become rigid, slowing down the speed at which signals travel between brain regions and impairing the rapid processing required for memory recall. The mechanism by which EPA supports the aging brain extends beyond simple structural support. It actively modulates the gene expression of microglia, the brain's resident immune cells. In a healthy state, microglia scavenge debris and maintain the pristine condition of the neural environment, but chronic inflammation can cause them to become overactive and destructive toward healthy synapses. High doses of EPA have been shown to calm this erratic immune response, effectively shifting the brain from a state of constant defense to one of growth and maintenance. This shift is crucial for anyone over 60, as the cumulative burden of oxidative stress often tips the balance toward degradation. By introducing a potent anti-inflammatory agent directly into the cellular architecture, the individual provides the brain with the safety signal it requires to focus energy on encoding new memories rather than fighting off perceived threats. It is reasonable to pause here and acknowledge that integrating a consistent nutritional protocol requires effort, yet the biological dividends justify the investment. In a practical setting, the challenge often lies in distinguishing between general omega-3 intake and the specific therapeutic threshold required for neuroprotection. Most standard diets or generic supplements do not provide the gram-level dosage of EPA necessary to cross the blood-brain barrier effectively and exert a biological change. An individual might consume fish occasionally, believing this efficient, only to find their cognitive baseline remains unchanged because the dosage falls short of the clinical requirement. Huberman suggests that aiming for a specific threshold of EPA, distinct from DHA, is the key lever for mood stabilization and inflammatory control. The person who prioritizes this specific lipid profile essentially creates a buffer against the cortisol spikes and stress responses that are known to atrophy the hippocampus, the brain's memory center. There are, however, limitations to this approach that must be understood to avoid disappointment or mismanagement of expectations. Essential fatty acids are foundational, meaning they set the stage for health, but they're not acute stimulants that provide an immediate boost in focus within the hour. The accumulation of EPA in cell membranes is a slow process, often taking weeks or months to reach steady-state levels where the benefits become palpable in daily life. Furthermore, if the individual consumes high amounts of processed seed oils rich in omega-6 fatty acids, these can compete for the same enzymes and absorption pathways, effectively negating the benefits of the EPA intake. The biological reality is that one cannot simply add a nutrient to a system that is otherwise inflamed by contradictory dietary inputs and expect optimized results. The role of blood flow cannot be overstated when discussing the delivery of these nutrients to the deep structures of the brain. Even with high levels of circulating EPA, the nutrient must traverse the intricate network of capillaries to reach the neurons that need repair. Vascular health, therefore, becomes a synergistic factor. If the small blood vessels are constricted or stiff, the transport of lipids is compromised. This is where the concept of neurovascular coupling comes into play, ensuring that when neurons fire, they receive an immediate surge of oxygen and nutrients. The introduction of EPA helps maintain the elasticity of these vessels, reducing the risk of microischemic events that silently contribute to cognitive decline over decades. For the person navigating their 60s and beyond, the daily application involves a deliberate selection of potent fish oil sources or algae-based alternatives that explicitly list the EPA content. It is not enough to look at the total fish oil milligrams. One must scrutinize the label for the specific EPA yield. A morning routine that includes this focused supplementation, perhaps paired with a meal to enhance lipid absorption, signals to the body that repair is the priority for the day. This simple, consistent action serves as a biological anchor, reducing the background noise of inflammation that often manifests as brain fog or mental fatigue. The psychological impact of taking control over one's neural architecture should not be underestimated. When an individual understands that their cognitive destiny is influenced by the quality of the fats they consume, the fear of age-related decline often diminishes, replaced by a sense of agency. This shift in mindset, from victimhood to active management, lowers psychological stress, which in turn further lowers the inflammatory burden on the brain. The cycle becomes virtuous. Better biological inputs lead to better psychological states, which foster an environment conducive to further biological repair. As the lipid layers of the brain are gradually restored and the membranes regain their youthful fluidity, the stage is set for the next critical phase of cognitive maintenance. The improved structural integrity allows for more efficient neurotransmission, but the metabolic engine that drives these signals requires its own specific fuel and regulation. The restoration of the physical hardware is merely the first step in a comprehensive strategy to revitalize the aging mind. What investment am I willing to make today to protect my future clarity? The metabolic dynamics of cognitive preservation, once the structural foundation of a neuron is secured through adequate lipid intake, the focus must shift to the metabolic processes that sustain energy production within the brain. The aging brain often faces a crisis of energy availability, a condition sometimes referred to as type 3 diabetes, where neurons become resistant to insulin and struggle to utilize glucose effectively. Andrew Huberman notes that maintaining insulin sensitivity is paramount for cognitive longevity because glucose is the primary fuel source for the demanding tasks of memory consolidation and focus. When neurons starve due to insulin resistance, they cannot perform the energy-intensive work of maintaining synaptic connections, leading to the gradual pruning of memories and skills. The individual must therefore adopt strategies that enhance metabolic flexibility, allowing the brain to switch efficiently between fuel sources or utilize glucose without impediment. The mechanism of glucose regulation is intimately tied to the health of the hippocampus, a brain region that is particularly sensitive to fluctuations in blood sugar. Chronic elevation of blood glucose creates a toxic environment known as glucotoxicity, which generates oxidative stress and damages the delicate mitochondria within brain cells. By managing carbohydrate intake and utilizing tools that improve insulin sensitivity, the person protects the mitochondria, ensuring they can continue to generate ADP, the energy currency of the cell. This metabolic discipline prevents the lethargy and mental slowing that often characterizes the postprandial slump, a window of time where cognitive performance typically dips for older adults. A practical scenario illustrates the profound impact of metabolic regulation on daily cognitive function. Consider an individual who typically starts the day with a high-sugar breakfast, triggering a rapid spike in blood glucose, followed by a crash that leaves them foggy and unfocused by mid-morning. By shifting to a meal composition that prioritizes protein and healthy fats, or by employing time-restricted feeding windows, the individual stabilizes their blood sugar levels. This stabilization provides a steady stream of fuel to the brain, allowing for sustained attention spans and the ability to engage in complex problem-solving without fatigue. The brain, no longer riding the roller coaster of glucose variability, can allocate resources to long-term maintenance rather than immediate survival. However, it is critical to recognize the limitations of metabolic interventions if they are not tailored to the individual's specific physiological needs. Excessive restriction of carbohydrates can, in some cases, lead to increased cortisol levels, which is counterproductive for brain health. The goal is not to eliminate fuel, but to optimize the body's ability to use it. Furthermore, metabolic changes take time to manifest in cognitive performance. The brain adapts slowly to new fuel regimens. A person might feel initial fatigue as their body adjusts to a lower glycemic load, and this transitional period requires patience and persistence. The integration of physical movement acts as a powerful catalyst for this metabolic optimization. Huberman frequently highlights the role of Zone 2 cardio, steady-state exercise where one can maintain a conversation, in improving mitochondrial density and function. This type of movement signals the body to build more efficient energy factories within the cells, including those in the brain. For the person over 60, this does not require intense athleticism, but rather consistent, rhythmic movement that elevates the heart rate and improves the circulation of metabolic byproducts. Deep sleep serves as the essential reset period for these metabolic processes, a time when the brain clears out metabolic waste products like beta amyloid through the glymphatic system. This waste clearance is highly energy dependent and occurs most efficiently when insulin levels are low and the body is in a fasted state. The individual who aligns their last meal with the circadian rhythm, leaving a gap before sleep, facilitates this cleansing process. The result is a brain that wakes up refreshed and free of the cellular debris that clogs neural pathways and impedes signal transmission. There is a distinct connection between the management of light exposure and metabolic health. Viewing sunlight early in the day resets the circadian clock, which in turn regulates the timing of hunger hormones and insulin secretion. The person who anchors their day with morning light exposure is not only setting a rhythm for sleep, but also synchronizing their metabolic clocks. This alignment ensures that the brain receives fuel when it is most active and rests when repair processes need to take precedence. The synergy between lipid support and metabolic control creates a resilient neural environment. While lipids rebuild the walls of the house, metabolic regulation ensures the electricity stays on. This dual approach addresses the two most common vectors of age-related decline: structural degradation and energy failure. With these systems stabilizing, the brain is primed to utilize specific neurotransmitters that govern the encoding of new information. How do I fuel my body to honor the demands of my mind? Optimizing the cholinergic pathway for memory retention with the structural and metabolic baselines established. The narrative of brain health turns to the specific chemical messengers that facilitate learning and memory. The neurotransmitter acetylcholine is the primary driver of focus, attention, and the encoding of new information, acting as a spotlight that highlights which neural circuits should be strengthened. Andrew Huberman explains that the decline in acetylcholine production is a hallmark of the aging brain, leading to the familiar senior moments where names or details slip away. The preservation of this cholinergic system is not merely about retention. It is about maintaining the neuroplasticity required to learn new skills and adapt to new environments well into the 7th, 8th, and 9th decades of life. The synthesis of acetylcholine relies heavily on the availability of choline, a nutrient that often becomes scarce in the diets of older adults. Once ingested, choline is transported to the brain, where it serves as the precursor for acetylcholine, provided the enzymatic machinery is functioning correctly. High-quality sources of choline, such as egg yolks or specific supplementation like alpha-GPC, can transiently boost the levels of available acetylcholine, sharpening focus for short durations. This mechanism is crucial because acetylcholine acts as a neuromodulator, increasing the signal-to-noise ratio in neural circuits, effectively turning up the volume on important inputs while dampening distractions. In the daily life of a person over 60, the practical application of cholinergic support can transform the experience of engaging with the world. Imagine the difference between reading a paragraph and having to reread it 3 times versus absorbing the concept in a single pass. By strategically timing choline intake before a period of cognitively demanding work, such as reading, learning a language, or managing finances, the individual leverages the brain's natural chemistry to enhance performance. This targeted approach moves beyond passive supplementation to active state management, where the person uses biology to induce a state of high focus exactly when it is needed. A critical counterpoint exists in the balance of the cholinergic system. More is not always better. Excessive acetylcholine can lead to muscle tension, headaches, or even a depressive mood in some individuals. The system requires a delicate equilibrium, and the indiscriminate flooding of the brain with precursors can backfire. It is also important to note that while choline supports the formation of memories, it does not replace the need for the repetition and engagement that solidifies them. The nutrient opens the door to plasticity, but the individual must still walk through it by actively using their mind. The role of nicotine, distinct from the harmful delivery mechanism of smoking, is a controversial but scientifically relevant aspect of the cholinergic conversation. Nicotinic receptors in the brain are direct targets for acetylcholine, and their activation improves focus and alertness. While not advocating for nicotine usage due to its addictive potential, understanding this pathway highlights the potency of the cholinergic system. Safe, non-addictive alternatives that stimulate these same pathways through natural precursors offer a sustainable route to maintaining cognitive sharpness without the physiological costs associated with stimulants. Attention is the currency of memory. Without the ability to sustain attention, the brain cannot encode the trace of an experience. The decline in attention span, often attributed to aging, is frequently a decline in cholinergic tone. By restoring this tone, the individual regains the capacity to hold a thought, manipulate it, and store it. This restoration of working memory is perhaps the most tangible benefit of optimizing the cholinergic pathway, as it directly impacts the ability to multitask and navigate complex environments. The integration of novelty is another potent stimulator of this system. When a person exposes themselves to new environments or challenges, the brain naturally releases acetylcholine to mark the event as significant. Combining nutritional support with a lifestyle that embraces novelty creates a powerful feedback loop. The supplement provides the fuel, and the new experience provides a spark. This combination keeps the cholinergic neurons active and prevents the atrophy that comes from routine and predictability. As the individual masters the modulation of their neurochemistry, they move from a defensive posture of preventing decline to an offensive posture of expanding capacity. The ability to focus deeply and remember clearly is the foundation of autonomy and engagement. With the lipid structures sound, energy systems optimized, and chemical messengers replenished, the final piece of the puzzle lies in the integration of these protocols into a sustainable, long-term lifestyle. Where does my focus drift when I most need it to stay? The long-term integration of neuroprotective protocols, the journey toward a revitalized brain, is not defined by a single intervention, but by the orchestration of multiple biological levers pulled in unison. The synthesis of lipid restoration, metabolic control, and cholinergic support creates a comprehensive shield against the ravages of time. Andrew Huberman's analytical lens suggests that the most effective protocols are those that can be adhered to consistently, becoming part of the fabric of daily life rather than sporadic efforts. The secret nutrient is not magic. It is a biological catalyst that works only when placed within a functioning system. The individual who commits to this integrated approach is essentially building a cognitive reserve, a buffer of neural health that withstands the inevitable stressors of aging. The ultimate goal of these protocols is to preserve the self, the memories, the personality, and the capacity for connection that define a human life. When the brain is inflamed and starved of energy, the world shrinks. The person withdraws to safety and routine. Conversely, when the brain is nourished with EPA, fueled by stable glucose, and sharpened by acetylcholine, the world expands. The individual retains the energy to engage with grandchildren, the focus to pursue hobbies, and the clarity to mentor others. This is the promise of neurobiology applied with precision, a lifespan that matches the health span of the mind. Implementation requires a shift in identity from a passive observer of aging to an active engineer of one's own biology. It involves the discipline to choose the fish oil over the inflammatory snack, the walk over the sedentary afternoon, and the complex book over the passive screen. These micro-decisions, compounded over months and years, result in a brain that defies the statistical averages of decline. The protocols discussed are not merely for survival. They are for flourishing. The realization that the brain is a renewable resource changes the emotional landscape of aging. Fear is replaced by curiosity, and resignation is replaced by strategy. The science confirms that while the body may age, the mind retains an extraordinary capacity for renewal if given the proper tools. The path is clear, the mechanisms are understood, and the outcome is within reach for those willing to do the work. What story will I create with the clarity I am building today?